Joining me now, small business owner. I love small business owner because I'm a small business owner. Lori Janke. She's the owner of several small businesses, including independent franchisee of Once Upon a Child, the Newport News, Plato's Closet, one of my daughter's favorite stores. That's in Mechanicsville. And Clothes Mentor in Newport News. She's got 55 employees between her 3 locations. She's been in business for 60 months, and she's a member of the Virginia Retail Federation and a member of the Virginia Retail Alliance. So she kind of knows what's happening, and we love every so often to get small business owners on to tell us what's really going on out there. Hey, Lori, good to have you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Lori, thank you so much. Let's get to your businesses now. You own several franchisees. How did you get involved in owning retail stores, especially clothing?
You know, it's interesting. I had been in a corporate setting for the previous 16 years, and I had gotten to a point in my life because I had a child where I was looking for more flexibility in my work schedule, and I was trying to find a way to be a full-time mom and work full-time and not have a conflict between the two. And so that increasingly started to look like being a business owner. And as I started looking at what that might look like, I found a little bit of comfort going the franchising option because that mitigates a little bit of the risk in that you're at least purchasing a plan that's been proven to work in other places. Now, we're still completely on the line for the success or failure of that business, but I liked the idea of getting a recipe that was going to help me get out of the gate a little bit faster. And so why did I end up in clothing? I had a little kid. I started shopping for a baby and felt like retail prices for kids stuff was an absolute racket. And I'm into recycling and reusing things. And so the concepts for all of my brands are based on recycling and reusing. And that allows us to sell items at 70% off retail prices.
Now, what's interesting, Lori, about what you've done is many times when people go into buying a franchise, for example, they stick with the same one. But you've got 3 different brands: Once Upon a Child, Plato's Closet, and Clothes Mentor, instead of, say, 3 Plato's Closets. Why?
You might say I'm a masochist, but no, the real reason is they're all based on the same resale concept. So you've got a different population that you're targeting, whether it's children or teens and 20-somethings or women. But part of it was just the nature of what territories were available. We started our Newport News businesses first, but, you know, the Hampton Roads economy is very, very heavily tied to military and government. And we know there are attempts to diversify that economy, but it's not happening yet. And as we started seeing with sequestration and things like that, we wanted a little bit of geographic diversity in our portfolio as well. So that made Mechanicsville an attractive option, and the brand that was available in that territory was Plato's Closet. So, you know, some of it was intent and design, some of it wasn't. It was really just looking at the business opportunities we had at the time and making the best decision at the moment.
So you've got 55 employees, Lori. So you've essentially created 55 jobs, right?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And so I want to talk about, if I may, I'm going to get to one thing that's on my mind, which is this crazy decision by the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB. I'm going to get into that in a minute. But just in a broader view, as a small business owner in Virginia, what are just a couple of your biggest challenges, like the things that really keep you up at night?
Oh, the things that keep me up at night. You know, the things at the federal level and the state level that would keep us up at night would be any changes to the classification between exempt and non-exempt employees. As we've got another regulation in front of the NLRB about this exempt classification requiring a minimum salary of $50,400. That's something that's keeping me awake at night. And we have, I guess we'll find out in February, but I think it's largely expected that that's going to go into effect. That would have a huge impact on my businesses.
How? Explain how.
Well, if we look at retail, most people that spend their lives in retail typically started in retail in an hourly position, and they've worked very, very hard in hourly positions, usually for 5, 10, or 15 years to reach the level of being a store manager. It's a big deal, and one of the big things about finally reaching that level is you move to a salaried classification. And if I look at the managers in my store, they are all salaried, but none of them would have salaries above $50,400 based on our current sales levels. So right now I have salaried managers who are responsible for getting the job done. They take huge responsibility for the business. They run the stores. They're great managers. And we've already had to have the conversation with them that says, hey, look, we know you worked really hard all your life in retail to reach this point, but it's probably going away. And a lot of them, just because of the very, very uncertain nature of retail and attendance in retail, being salaried was a nice buffer for them because, you know, sometimes you might have a 60-hour week, sometimes you have a 38-hour week, and we just kind of trust them to be adults and do their job, manage the businesses. If they get in a situation where we see, hey, they're really going above and beyond, we have processes in place for comp days and things like that that are benefits we can offer to them based on their current classification that will all go away when they become hourly employees again. So one, it's a very emotional thing to change someone's classification and to take salary away from them, because when you've lived in hourly employment your whole life, you know, you wake up sick and you think, oh God, what's going to happen if I don't get paid today? And when you reach that salaried level and you know you've got much more flexibility in when you work and how you work, there's a lot of peace of mind that comes with that, and it's a nice incentive for professional advancement that you can offer. Well, that's all going to go away if this new ruling stands in February, because most small businesses, you know, if you're looking at sales below $1 million a year, you're typically not in a position to offer a salary to anyone, including yourself, over $50,400. So it's going to be a huge burden, because we're now going to have to try to find people to accept manager-level responsibility for stores but be hourly employees.
Unbelievable. You know, when the government gets involved between yourself and your employee, and how you have to manage your company, it's just unbelievable the amount of regulations that are coming down. I mean, it's really detracting people from getting involved, taking that risk. I mean, Lori, we're with Lori Janke, small business owner in Central Virginia. Basically created 55 jobs, and now she's got to deal with the NLRB and some of this crazy stuff. Lori, I want to get to the nation's 28 million small businesses that are under severe threat by this other ruling of the NLRB. In the case of Browning Ferris Industries, which reverses over 3 decades of clear labor policy, defining what it means to be a quote-unquote joint employer. Can you explain that to our listeners?
I can explain it as best I can. I think the challenge we all have with this ruling is it is so broad and it is so vague that we're all struggling to come to grips with what it means. But normally in the past, so for the last 30 years, we had a really clear definition of what it means to actually employ someone. So for the last 30 years, so since 1984, to be an employer, you had to exercise direct control over someone's wages, benefits, and their working conditions. So basically it meant to be an employer, you had to meaningfully affect matters relating to the employment relationship, including hiring, firing, discipline, supervision, and direction. So it was a pretty clear policy, and one that's easy to understand. If I hire you, if I fire you, if I pay you and I control your benefits, I am your employer. What's happened with the Browning-Ferris ruling is they've now introduced a new standard for joint employer that says there can be an indirect control over wages, benefits, and working conditions to be established as a joint employer. So it's pretty confusing. It's leaving most of us, I would say, in a bit of a limbo right now, because we don't actually understand, because they haven't defined what it now means to be an employer. The way that they've set up this new standard of indirect control is very ambiguous, and what we need now is for Congress to act to clarify this and get rid of the ambiguity, and they can do that by passing Senate Bill 2015, which is the Protecting Local Business Opportunity Act, that would reverse this decision and return us back to the definition of joint employer that we've had for over 30 years. And, we talk about common sense. To me, it's common sense. If I'm your employer, I control whether you work for me and how much you're paid. To now introduce into the mix someone having indirect control over those decisions as your employer just doesn't make sense.
How would somebody have indirect control? Like a temp agency? What else?
Yes. Yeah, and if we look at the Browning-Ferris decision, as I understand it, you had BFI Industries using a staffing agency, I believe it was called Lead Point, for the hiring of their drivers. So if you want my personal opinion on this was payback to the unions by the Obama administration, because drivers for Browning-Ferris, I think, were looking to unionize, right. But were not allowed to unionize because they were not employed by Browning-Ferris Industries. So in this ruling, what they've said is, okay, you actually aren't employed by them. You're provided to them by Lead Point, so we're going to make these two your joint employers, and guess what you can do now? You can unionize.
Right.
So if we look at the specific cases, I understand it, that was kind of what it was looking at. But think about any contracting or consulting relationship that you've ever heard of. So if I look at my businesses, for instance, I work with a media buying company for my advertising because I'm not an expert in negotiating radio and television rates and schedules and producing all of that stuff. So I contract with a business to do that for me. I have an account executive that's assigned to me that does all the work for my business, not my employee. It works for the vendor that provides this service to me. But if I'm not happy with this person's performance now, and I, let's say, give feedback to this contractor to say something negative about this person's performance that could result in some impact on their employment, under the current regulation that's proposed, because it is so ambiguous and because it is so broad, I could potentially be deemed a joint employer because I had indirect control over something related to her employment.
Wow. So if that person brings a suit against their advertising agency employer, they could name you in the suit also because you didn't want them serving your business because you didn't feel they were representing you in a way that met your needs. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's a potential interpretation. I think bigger impact for people like myself who are franchisors is the franchisor-franchisee relationship.
Right.
And that's a huge threat because if I look at my businesses, when I went to the franchise, I bought a brand, I bought a computer system, and I brought, as I said, an operating model that we know has been successful if you follow that model. But on a day-to-day basis, on any decision related to the success or failure of my business, I am completely on my own. And that was everything from how I incorporated my business to financing my business to negotiating my lease to purchasing everything that went in my store, building it out, putting it together, hiring my people, acquiring my inventory, and running my businesses. The franchise has absolutely no connection or relationship to my day-to-day operations. That is all me. But under this ruling now, my employees could potentially claim that franchising company is now a joint employer.
Unbelievable. So I'd say this is just another one of these crazy political moves coming out of the Obama administration, and I think you nailed it. It's payback. I want you to stay on with us a minute so I can get your info so we can be sure to have you back on. Fabulous insight. This is the John Fredericks Radio Network. We want to thank Lori Janke for being with us.